Good afternoon, everyone. It is Saturday, March the 20th, 2021. It is currently 12:19 p.m. Central Time. I'm still sitting here at Victory Baptist Church. I'm still here in the sanctuary, and we still have plenty of things to talk about. Now, I don't know if my voice is going to hold up. That's always troubling when I start and I don't know if my voice is going to work this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. It's Saturday afternoon now. I've been here since this morning. But welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And, there's so many things I wanted to get to today. There's so many things I wanted to get to today. I don't know exactly. I don't have a good system and how to cover all the things that I want to cover. But I'm always working on it, trying to come up with a better system. So I apologize if I didn't get to the thing that you wanted me to get to today, but I'm always trying to cover what I think is important, what I think is necessary. And one of the things that I think has been very important is our series on the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know if I know it hasn't been. Look, it doesn't get all the downloads. I know what things get the downloads and what things doesn't get the downloads. But in spite of, look, here's what I know. At some point in everyone's Christian life, you're going to sit in a church and your pastor's going to do a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount. That is an absolute guarantee. If you listen to sermons, if you listen to Christian radio, you're going to hear a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount. That is absolutely guaranteed. And it's also absolutely guaranteed that whatever preacher you're listening to is going to take from church history one of the 9, 10, 11, 12 ways of interpreting that sermon. They're going to take the Sermon on the Mount and use one of those ways of interpreting it. And I'm trying my best to equip you so that you're not tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine, that you can identify, I know that. Okay, I heard that on the Theology Central podcast. That's method number 3 to interpreting the Sermon on the Mount. That's method number 6. And I also know that there's some major logical inconsistencies with that approach. And this approach is problematic. Let's listen to this sermon series to see if the pastor commits some of those logical fallacies and commits some of the errors that was pointed out to me on the Theology Central podcast. So I think that this is important, even though others may not. I think it is, and it will be there. And when someone is like, man, I don't know what my pastor's doing with the Sermon on the Mount, let me go do some searching on the internet. Maybe they'll come across this series and be like, wow, didn't know that there were 9 or 10 or 11 different ways of approaching the text. Oh, okay. He's reviewing sermons on this. Okay. So this is beneficial. I'm hoping that if it's not beneficial now, it will be beneficial at some point. Someone will come across it and say, this has been beneficial. I know that I'm going against the majority of the way. I know I am arguing. I know I'm making an argument against the dominant way, the majority way that the Sermon on the Mount is handled. I disagree with the way it's typically handled, and we've clearly articulated that in all of the past episodes we've done in this series so far. What we're doing right now is we're reviewing a sermon by Chuck Swindoll, from Insight for Living. Now, we were reviewing sermons from a church in Council Bluffs, Iowa, but that got so frustrating and so troubling that I didn't want to continue down that path. I wanted to take a detour and go okay, let's listen to how Chuck Swindoll handles the Sermon on the Mount. He has not yet established clearly his interpretive method. He's given us what he feels the main point of the Sermon on the Mount is. The Sermon on the Mount is designed to fight hypocrisy. It's for Christians to fight hypocrisy. All right. He's not really, okay, are you claiming that we can follow the Sermon on the Mount? Are you saying, there's a lot of questions he hasn't answered, but we've only listened to part 1 of his sermon. Well, not of his entire sermon on the sermon. We've not reviewed the entire series that he did on the Sermon on the Mount. We are in part 2 of reviewing his introductory message on the Sermon on the Mount. And the reason we're focusing on the introductory message is because that's going to give us the clue. That's going to tell us. And he's not really established one yet. So I have a feeling by the time it's done that the disservice he's doing to everyone, he's not warning them that there's other ways of interpreting the text. So he's not equipping them so they won't be tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. And number 2, he's just kind of saying the text is there to fight Hypocrisy. But that leaves a lot of questions about what Jesus was trying to accomplish. We're like, look, guys, here's what you got to do not to be a hypocrite. Okay, is anyone going to do it perfectly? Obviously not. So that means there's always going to be some level of hypocrisy in every Christian, because the sermon to fight hypocrisy, we are never going to fully obey. So then what do we do with that? Well, I think the sermon is there first and foremost to show us the righteous demands of God and the kingdom of God. Here are the righteous demands of the kingdom, and that we all acknowledge that we are never going to be righteous enough to enter into that kingdom without an imputed righteousness that comes from Christ. And Christ, the one who preached the sermon, is the one who kept the sermon, and his passive and active obedience is imputed to me by faith. So I stand as someone who has fulfilled the Sermon on the Mount in Christ. In my practical life, I fall short of it. It's righteous demands I can never truly meet, but I do try to pursue them. I think you have to explain that clearly, or this just becomes, do this. It just becomes law, and you live your life trying to follow it, and you can't figure out why you can never truly do it. But almost in every Protestant church, they try to claim that you have the power to obey it, while at the same time claiming you can't do it perfectly, which is the most broken logic that I've ever heard, but we've already heard that demonstrated in this series so far. So are you ready? We're going to get back to Chuck Swindoll, coming from the radio program Insight for Living. So that means his one message is broken into 3 radio programs, because each radio program is about 27 minutes. You take their introduction and their conclusion, and then they're promoting whatever material they have. You really get down to about 20 minutes of teaching. So we're just going to jump in, and we'll see what happens. As always, I don't listen to these in advance because I don't like to rehearse my responses. I like them to be in real time. So imagine you drove by the church. You saw my car. You came in and go, what are you getting ready to do? Oh, I'm getting ready to listen to a sermon on the Sermon on the Mount. You want to listen? Sure. Grab a Bible, sit down. Let's listen together. That's what this is designed to do. Some people get that. Some people don't get it. For those who don't get it, I don't know how many more times I can explain it, okay? All right, I don't know how. I've done everything I can to explain that, and I still get emails. I'm like, you're missing the point. It's not me sitting down, listening to it, writing notes. It's us listening to it together in real time. So, all right, here we go. Are you ready? Here we go.
If you're not fond of hypocrites, you're in very good company. Jesus wasn't either. In fact, in his well-known Sermon on the Mount, Jesus unleashed a stinging rebuke against those who held a double standard. Today on Insight for Living, Chuck Swindoll continues a message started yesterday, in which he summarizes chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. This section of the New Testament contains what Chuck refers to as the Sermon of all sermons, and it's punctuated with warnings to those who either twist the truth or parade their religious pride.
You are here today with many needs that I know nothing of. You are, as a child of God, able to present your own needs before Him, and I urge you to do so as I lead us in a general way in prayer. My desire is that you listen to the Lord, who guides you in your own time of prayer, and I will lead us before the morning offering. Bow with me, please. We come on the heels of a busy week, our Father, and we have been busy through the morning, and now we're able to be quiet before you. Begin, I pray, by quieting our hearts. Calm us. Relieve our anxiety. Begin now to break our habit of simply doing the religious thing on Sunday morning and leaving unchanged and unmoved. Make this day significant. Speak to us as if you and each one of us were sitting together in our own family room, talking, listening, thinking. with plans to change in any area you suggest. Address needs, Lord. I pray that you will not find us resistant or denying them, but may we acknowledge, it's me, O Lord, most in need of what you are saying today. It's me. It's not my partner in life. It's not my child. It's not my parent. It's not my friend. It's me. Speak to us directly. Convict us where we need it. Guide us clearly in areas where we are confused. And provide us with a map that will give us hope to locate the destination and then pursue it. Watch over those men and women in uniform today who are in difficult places, dangerous places. May they press on with courage and confidence. May those who lead them in battle do so wisely, with discernment. Comfort their families at home and bring them back safely to us when the victory is won. We pray for those, our Father, who live under the threat of terrorists, those whose lives are being threatened, whose homes are being invaded, whose children and family members are being killed. Give us an appreciation and a renewed gratitude for this land of the free. We pray that you will bring counselors to those in leadership over our nation, that they may speak in a straightforward, uncompromising way, that the truth may be heard and change occur. We're in a desperate situation as a country, and we acknowledge it. Give strength where there is weakness, guidance where there is ignorance, and hope where there is despair. These offerings we give today really come from you, for our treasure would be nothing were it not for your wonderful provision and generosity. Find us faithful as we give generously and joyfully. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Everyone said, amen.
Couple of interesting things about that. It's interesting they started the radio program with that prayer. A lot of times people ask me, why do you always start every program with the same way? You give the date, you give the day, the month, the year, and the time. Why do you do that? I get asked that question so many times. It's obvious. Look at what just happened. He's praying there, and a lot of that prayer talked about terrorism, the military, victory. When was this sermon preached? When did this happen? I bet you this was sometime not long after the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. I could be wrong, but we have no way of knowing. So whenever you speak, you're talking about things that become very dated later on. And when people hear, if they don't have that context, they don't know what was going on at that time. Like if I'm sitting and listening to that, I'm thinking, okay, I wonder, like my mind, that's a prayer, but my mind was focused on, I wonder if that was after the September the 11th attacks. See, and so then I wasn't actually engaging in the prayer. I was actually thinking that. I give the date reference so that anything I say, that later on when someone hears it, like, oh, okay, that's why he was talking about that. I try to give that I try to give the date for later on when people hear it, that there's some connection to what was going on and they understand the date and the time. That's why I do that. Secondly, whenever I hear a pastor pray, I sometimes hear, and I know, and I hate this. I hate this. So many times as a pastor, when we pray publicly, like either before a sermon, especially after a sermon, we have such a tendency to preach instead of pray. Now, I'm not saying that's what he was doing, but there were times it seemed like he wanted to get, sometimes it seems like in his prayer, he was trying to get a point across to the people, not communicating with God. I always have to remind myself when I pray, and that's why I don't do a lot of praying. Like, I know a lot of pastors, and I've even had people call me out on it because they who visited the church. I've had visitors call me out saying, you didn't pray before your sermon and you didn't pray after your sermon. Okay, is there a clear instruction of how I'm supposed to do this? Like, I would hope that I have prayed before I preach, getting up behind the pulpit and then praying. Am I really communicating with God, or am I trying to demonstrate to everyone? Like, you'll have pastors get up there. Lord, as I get ready to prepare your word, let it not be my words, but your words. Hide me behind your cross. Am I really communicating? Couldn't I have not communicated that with God before I got to the pulpit? Am I doing that? Like, is there a psychological game being played there? Like, is when preachers pray that way before their sermon, are you really telling the people, look, you're about to hear God. You're not hearing me, so don't get mad at me. Is it kind of a manipulative technique, or is it just a tradition that we don't even think about? I'm like, do I need to pray before the sermon, before I preach the sermon? Because haven't I already prayed for the sermon way before I got behind the pulpit to preach said sermon, right? Shouldn't I have been praying for the sermon during the preparing of the sermon? And then after the sermon, I know it's traditionally to pray, but like in many cases, you'll hear pastors after the sermon in their prayer, they basically re-preach the sermon. I catch myself doing that all the time. I'm like, what am I? I'm supposed to be talking to God. I'm not like, okay, I didn't get all of my points made, so I need to use the prayer time to summarize my points one more time. And I do that all the time. And I'm like, why do I do that? Why do I do that? Why do I do that? And so just remember, for you, for me, for all of us, prayer is communicating to God, not communicating to the people listening. We're talking to God. We're talking to the Creator. You're not talking for anyone else's benefit, right? And even we can pray before, like sometimes you'll see Christians in a restaurant praying before a meal. Are they really communicating with God, or are they praying so that they can be seen by everyone else? I've heard people say, well, praying in a restaurant's a good witness. Prayer is not to be utilized so that you can witness to other people. Prayer is not so that you can be seen or that you can try to do evangelism. Prayer is you communicating with God. Are you truly communicating with God when you pray? Are you truly communicating with God? Are you actually communicating to people around you? It's just something that I think about all the time. I just think a lot of times people, especially prayer in church, I just think it's just like, it's there to say, look, we prayed, check. We prayed, check. I think prayer, and maybe you disagree with this, I think prayer is primarily a private activity where I'm privately communicating with God. Privately. I'm actually communicating with God. I don't know. Whenever I hear a preacher pray, I just sometimes thinking, is that preacher praying, or is that preacher trying to preach? And because as preachers, we preach. That's what we do. I'm guilty of it. I'm assuming every pastor is guilty of it. But I'm assuming that there's been times you've been guilty of not really. Are you really praying to God? Or are you just, what are you doing? I think it's always something we have to ask ourselves. All right, let's continue. Just interesting they started the program with that. And again, the historical, I wish we had the date of this sermon, because I think we would have a clue of what's going on. They don't give the date. I wish they did. All right, here we go.
You're listening to Insight for Living. To study the book of Matthew with Chuck Swindoll, be sure to download his Searching the Scriptures studies by going to insightworld.org/studies. And now Chuck's message about the sermon of all sermons.
Of all the sermons Jesus delivered, none is more significant, more famous, more convicting, or more enduring than his immortal Sermon on the Mount. That's why I call it the sermon of all sermons. It cannot be improved upon. Before we get into it, I want to do today sort of an overview of the sermon as a whole, and even before that, I want to set the stage for it because you may have overlooked that in your understanding of the Scriptures. So go to chapter 5, Matthew's Gospel, and let's focus on the first 2 verses. Let me point out some things that can be easily overlooked. They're contrasts. Instead of Jesus waiting for the people, I should say, instead of Jesus going to the people, he had the people come to him. See verse 1. One day as he saw the crowds gathering, he went up on a mountainside. Most preachers would rush to the crowd. Jesus walks away from the crowd, and on the mountainside we read, he sat down and his disciples gathered. When you compare this with Luke and the parallel passage in Luke that matches Matthew 5, you notice that not just the disciples who were the close and the called ones of Jesus, but a larger gathering than they had come together to hear this. Second thing I noticed, he's not inside a building. Most sermons are preached in a building called a church or a chapel or a temple or a tabernacle, sometimes a synagogue. He's not inside a building. He does his outside on a mountainside. Notice also that he didn't stand up. Most sermons today are preached while the person is on his feet. We read that Jesus sat down. The people gathered around him sitting, and he sat down among them. It wasn't uncommon and isn't to this day for rabbis to deliver their message in a sitting position. So he's sitting down. I noticed also he doesn't begin by blasting away as many evangelists do when they preach the gospel. He begins in a very gentle way, telling them how they can find lasting happiness. And he repeats that several times. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. How happy are you? How happy will you be? How happy you are, as he delivers what we know today as a series of Beatitudes. What was the result of delivering the message? Turn to the end. Often at the end of a sermon, people are ready to leave and they're on their way to wherever they want to go for the day, quickly forgetting what they heard. It didn't happen this day. On the 28th verse of chapter 7, when Jesus finished, watch closely, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. This sermon stunned them. They couldn't get over it. They had never heard anything like it. Though they had heard preaching all their lives, none like this. One man writes, the people had heard many sermons before from the regular rabbis in the synagogue. We have specimens of these discourses preserved in the Mishnah and Gemara, the Jewish Talmud. When both were completed, the driest, dullest collection of disjointed comments on every conceivable problem in the history of mankind had been addressed. You have sat through sermons like that, and you have been bored to tears. And may I say to you, it wasn't your fault. If a sermon is uninteresting, it's the preacher's fault. Now, you may not be interested in hearing it, and you may be reluctant to listen, but if he delivers the message as it is designed to be delivered, you cannot be bored. Because the truth is designed to set you free. And when you are liberated from bondage, you're not bored. In this case, the bondage is hypocrisy. It's a long-standing habit among those who are followers of Christ to learn the system. Unfortunately, we're raised around it. Preachers can be the worst at hypocrisy. We can look like we're living one life when in fact we're living a lie. We can say things beautifully, but we can live them pathetically. And because you're around that, you can pick up that habit, just as people did in the days of Jesus. And this sermon is designed to make you different, to make you break that habit, if it happens to be one you have formed. In fact, I agree with John R.W. Stott. I think the key statement in the entire sermon is chapter 6, verse 8. Do not be like them. Jesus' concern is that those who follow him will continue to follow the Pharisees and the scribes, to continue to live like and sound like and ultimately look like hypocrites. Before I go any further into this 3 chapters of this Sermon on the Mount, I want to address a few of my comments to hypocrisy in our day. We live around political hypocrisy. That's not a political statement, it's a true statement. Rare is the politician who isn't also a hypocrite. They learn to play a part. They make promises they have no plans to keep. And they deliver them with persuasion.
I'm going to interrupt here because this is how a lot of the radio programs do, and it's sometimes very frustrating, is like you'll have part 1, and then part 2, in many cases, is like over half of the radio program is basically replaying what you heard in part 1. And you're like, okay, like whoever does the editing of the sermons, it's like, wow, but like we've got 15 minutes left, and we know we got their conclusion, their little concluding thing, where they give contact information and all of that. So that means we're not even going to, we've got less than 15 minutes, and they've not really gotten to anything new yet. And he still has not, in any way, shape, or form, even tried to give us a hermeneutical framework of how to actually interpret the Sermon on the Mount, other than it's against hypocrisy. So this has been, this is what happens when you do this live. You never know what you're going to get. And this one is very, I'm just sitting here going, okay, can we get to something here? Can we get to something? Can we? Please? Right. So here we go.
The point where you will vote for them, believing they will keep their word. Most don't. So there's political hypocrisy. Here's another one. There is a moral and ethical hypocrisy that has swept our times. We leave an impression that an individual is trustworthy, has integrity, and we find out later that person lied. And then there's financial hypocrisy. It's called fraud. We've all read of it. Funds are raised for one cause, but they are spent for other things. Promises are broken. Plans are phony. The fraud occurs, and we are shocked. So the Sermon on the Mount is a message that is for every one of us living today. The worst kind of hypocrisy, in my opinion, is religious hypocrisy. So-called spiritual leaders look one way, but in reality, they do not live that way. In private, they are another kind of person. Sermons are preached that another one originated. Instead of Christ and his kingdom being enhanced, the person himself is enhanced. The great temptation is to learn the system and to fit into that lifestyle. Now then, let's take a quick look at the survey of the Sermon on the Mount, all right? I'll give you simple words that give you an outline topic.
Okay, I think he's moving on to advance it. His discussion about hypocrisy, I think, is very, very important, very powerful. He made the powerful statement in the last one that we reviewed that we learn to be good hypocrites before we learn to be good Christians. And I think there is so much truth to that, But here's the question I think we have to ask ourselves. Because Christianity teaches a morality that all Christians acknowledge we're never going to do so perfectly. We're going to fall short over and over and over and over and over again. That's why we have to rely on an imputed righteousness, because any practical righteousness, we're never going to live up to a practical righteousness that would ever get us into heaven. So we have to rely on imputed righteousness, because God's righteous standards we cannot keep. The minute we become a Christian, I don't know how we never acknowledge this. Isn't the entire system designed in a sense that we are going to be hypocrites, right? Because we're holding to a morality that we ourselves can never keep perfectly. So we tell the world, this is the right morality, but we have to communicate to them, but no one can fulfill this perfectly. That's why we need Christ. Like, here's the law. None of us fulfills it. So we need Christ, but somehow that gets lost in a lot of our communication. I think we have to put on this front that, look, we keep this righteous standard. Look at how moral we are as Christians. And then over and over and over and over again, we fall short. We fall short. We fall short. And the world's like, you don't even live up to your standard. And like, that's the whole point. Nobody can. So how do we communicate that in a way so that we're not hypocritical? Because just again, the standard that which we are called to live is holiness. We're never going to fulfill it. So in other words, we're always going to fall short. We're never going to live consistently with the standard which we proclaim. So how do you do that without being a hypocrite? I think we have to be very brutally honest that this law that we try to live by, we're never going to do so perfectly. We're always going to fall short. Not to excuse our actions, but to communicate that no, we're not claiming that we're going to ever do this perfectly. I don't know how we do that in a correct way. I guess so far, his sermon on the Sermon on the Mount introduction is less about how to actually interpret the sermon and more about what do we do with hypocrisy. So it's a very interesting question. In his introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, I wish he would actually deal with the hermeneutics of interpreting it, but he's not even seemed interested in even going there, which is why many Christians don't even understand that there's all these different ways of approaching the sermon, and they don't even have the hermeneutical skills and how to deal with it, because churches never go there. That's why we're doing what we are doing. All right, less than 13 minutes to go, so we don't have a lot to listen to, but let's see how he's going to break this down now. Here we go.
At least I suggest it. It's not inspired, so you certainly are free to change it. But here's what I think Matthew chapter 5 is teaching. Out with hypocrisy. 3 words. I could write them over the chapter 5. Out with hypocrisy. The chapter falls neatly into 3 segments. First, the Beatitudes, verses 3 through 12. The Beatitudes answer the question, what does it mean to have character? Jesus' great goal among his followers was not great productivity, was not leaving a great impression. It was developing people with great character. They are who you think they are. They are real to the core. If you want to know what that sounds like or looks like, learn the Beatitudes. When you get to chapter 5, verse 13 down through 16, we have another question answered.
I got to stop right there. If you look at the Beatitudes describe a way of life that everyone falls short of. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. We don't do that correctly. We don't do that near enough. We don't do that right. Nobody does. Blessed are the pure in heart. No one is truly pure in heart. So the Beatitudes isn't like, if you do this, you won't be a hypocrite. The Beatitudes says we're all hypocrites. Therefore, who can fulfill the Beatitudes? Only Jesus Christ fulfills the Beatitude. How do we get the blessings from the Beatitudes? We get the blessings because we are in Christ. I don't know why every preacher seems to just, hey, here's the Sermon on the Mount. You don't want to be a hypocrite? Follow it. Okay. And at some point, you always acknowledge that we're not going to do it perfectly, which means we're always going to be a hypocrite because we're never going to live according to that very standard. So this becomes maddening at some point. It becomes, I don't know why this is so complicated. It gives a standard which we're never going to fulfill, ever, under any circumstance, ever. Christ did. This is law, which shows me my sin, which turns me to Christ. Christ kept the Sermon on the Mount. I blessed all the blessings that come from it, I have in him. Doesn't mean I excuse my actions. Again, people think that means to excuse. I'm not excusing. I'm just acknowledging the reality. I am a depraved sinner. When I became a Christian, my depravity is still there. My sinful nature is still there, making it impossible for me to fulfill God's law in a practical way. I could not fulfill it to get saved, and I cannot keep it. I cannot fulfill it to stay saved. My righteousness that is going to keep me saved and get me saved is the righteousness that comes from Christ. It's imputed to my account. I'm not infused with a righteousness that I can okay, now I can fulfill the Sermon on the Mount. No, you cannot.
What does it mean to influence others? By that I mean influencing them for the good. It means that we shake the salt, verse 13. It means that we shine the light, verse 14. It means that we spread good deeds among those around us. Please observe, we're spreading good deeds among the lost and the saved. You don't first find out if the person is a Christian as to how you're going to treat the person. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter whether the person is saved or lost. If you're doing good deeds, you do them, and that's when you will discover that individual who is lost becomes suddenly interested in what it means to be a Christian. Not always, but often. So verses 13 to 17 are answering, what does it mean to, verses 13 to 16, what does it mean to influence others for the good? And then the end of the chapter, 17 to 48, what does it mean to be godly? What does it mean to be godly? And there are a number of examples that we're going to get into as we work our way through. Jesus is drawing a contrast as he illustrates it from the commandments themselves. Let me show you what I mean. Verse 27. You've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. Verse 28, I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman with lust already has committed adultery. Same would be said of a woman who looks at a man lustfully. It's adultery. Jesus is correcting the understanding that it's something in the heart. See, he's dealing with the inner person.
Which condemns everyone, which condemns everyone. If you say, so the only way you will not be a hypocrite is if you never have lust in your heart. If you have lust in your heart, you're a hypocrite, then we're all hypocrites. So how do we interpret this sermon? How do we interpret this sermon? This basically, going back to my Lutheran days, this is law, 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 law. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And at some point, any honest person is going to say, but I don't do it. Exactly. That's why we need Christ, who did do this for us. Doesn't excuse our disobedience to it. We must strive. We must try to live according to it, but we have to also acknowledge to everyone we are going to fall short of it. So in a reality, Christianity is designed that we're going to be hypocrites in some way, shape, or form unless we are brutally honest with our failures and with our sin and not try to come across as if we don't have any. We're all sinners. You can condemn me all day. You can tell me, oh, you did this, you did this, you did this. You can bring up everything I've ever done in my past. You can throw it in my face. You can condemn me 9,000 times over. But trust me, there is plenty of sin in you that you could be condemned for. We're all sinners. That's the state we're in. Now, how can we help each other try to live out a Christian life and demonstrate as less hypocrisy as possible? I'm all for that. But again, he's not offered any, he's not even giving us any guidelines on how to actually interpret this text, other than it just being commands that you need to follow.
The commandment dealt with the outer person. This goes to the heart. Look at another one, verse 31. You've heard the law say a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. That's what the religious teachers taught in the days of the first century. But I say, a man who divorces his wife, unless it's been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And he goes on to describe that. So he addresses the subject of godliness as it relates to the harmony of a marriage.
And look at how many people are sitting in churches who were married, who got a divorce, who got remarried, and in many cases don't even meet, because some people call this is the exemption clause, they don't even meet this exemption, therefore they're actually living in adultery. Are they told to abstain? No. Are they viewed in a bad way? No. They're just viewed as good members of the church, even though they're living in adultery. So that would make them what? Hypocrites. So how do you deal with that? How do you do it? It's just like, well, so this just shows you that to live godly, you have to have harmony in your marriage. No, this would show if you're going to live godly, you cannot find yourself in a marriage where you're committing adultery. All right, that's specific. And I bet you there's people sitting in that church that were guilty of that very thing. Are they held accountable? Are they? No, nobody looks at it. So even sometimes the way we deal with some of these commands, we just kind of dismiss them so that everyone in the church feels like that they're actually being obedient when in reality they're not. So all of these sermons on the Sermon on the Mount are starting to drive me crazy. All right, let's continue.
Verse 34, but I say to you. Verse 39, but I say to you. See, he is helping them understand. Again, verse 44, but I say to you. He's clarifying what it means to be truly godly. So out with hypocrisy, that's chapter 5. When you get to chapter 6, here's a new title. Down with performance. Down with performance.
Now, one thing Swindoll is great at, he's really good at making it very applicable. And I love this. What he's basically done is he's read the chapter and he's giving chapter titles, which is what I teach you to do in the chapter summary method of Bible study, which everyone should know to do and everyone should do it all the time. Out with hypocrisy, down with performance. That's really good. Summarizing what's in the chapters. That's wonderful. That's good observation. Observation. All right, he's going with observation, but how do we interpret this? How do we interpret this? Is just simply rules that I'm to follow? Can I follow them? Can I not follow them? Because anyone who starts looking at these rules, you're going to fall short every single day of you'll live in a perpetual state of failure, which leads to a perpetual state of discouragement, which can lead to a very fatal case of depression. There's got to be a way, there's got to be a framework in what I do with this. Here's all of these rules. Okay, thank you. Just add 9 million more rules to my Christian life that I'm going to fall short of. Thank you, okay? What do I do with my failure, which is consistent? It's a perpetual state of failure. And any Christian who denies that, well, then you're living in denial.
This section of the sermon digs deeply. It's saying, quit trying to look good. Quit trying to appear pious. Here, Jesus reaches over and peels off two commonly used masks. One is pride. Look at chapter 6, verse 1. Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others. That's what the chapter is about. That's what this part of the sermon is about. Don't do what you do to cause other people to admire you or for the purpose of thinking better of you. For your Father has the rewards for you in heaven. So he gives 3 illustrations. Verse 2, when you give to someone in need, Don't blow a trumpet. Don't call attention to it in the street. Simply give, and you will have a reward. But if you give for these other reasons, your reward is lost. Look at verse 5. When you pray, don't do it this way, like the hypocrites who love to pray in public on street corners where everyone can hear them. I'll tell you the truth, the reward, that's all the reward they'll ever receive. But when you pray, go into your closet. May your prayer life be cultivated when you're alone, in private, not practiced when you're in public. And the better you learn to pray in private, the more easy you will feel praying in public, because you will not be praying to others, but praying to the Lord. Look at verse 16. When you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do. They try to look miserable. They let themselves get dirty, gaunt. They walk around as so you will realize they've been fasting. But when you fast, look normal. Clean yourself up. Fasting is to be done in private. Your Father who sees everything will reward you for it. Then the other mask is the mask of looking calm when in fact you're filled with anxiety. And Jesus addresses worry, our favorite indoor sport, in the latter half of the 6th chapter. Again and again and again he addresses worry, worry, worry. Verse 25, I tell you not to worry. 27, can all your worries add a single moment to your life? 28, why worry about your clothing? 31, so don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat or drink or wear? Verse 34, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough worries of its own. So you read the Sermon on the Mount and you begin to take it to heart. You realize that worry really has no place in your life. I realize when I say that, I'm taking away your favorite friend. Some of you would have to say, if I didn't have something to worry about, I'd be worried about that.
And he's acknowledging that everyone there worries, and if he took away worry, they'd be worried about taking away worry. So that means they, guess what? Don't fulfill the Sermon on the Mount, which means they're hypocrites. So how do we interpret the sermon? I think he's Dr. Swindoll. I don't know if he has a doctorate or not. Chuck Swindoll, how do we interpret this sermon? All you're giving is all of these rules. But he's even acknowledging that all the people there would already be guilty of the worry section. And trust me, they would already be guilty of the beatitude section. And trust me, they'd already be guilty of the lust section. And trust me, you probably got a large portion of people sitting in a church the size of his who are guilty of the marriage, divorce, and remarriage section. So you've got a lot of guilty people in front of you. So does everybody just leave thinking that, what does everyone leave thinking? Woe is me, I am undone. Exactly. That's exactly what this will lead you to.
I've got to have something. Most people have a longer worry list than prayer list. So when you pray about something, you leave it with him. You don't carry it with you as a burden. He tells us about doing that as he talks about down with performance. When we get to chapter 7, here's a third. I'm going to divide this chapter into 2. How about up with acceptance? Up with acceptance. And here he begins with those convicting words, do not judge others, and you will not be judged. In other words, accept others for what they are and for who they are. I love the way he illustrates it, verse 3. Why worry about the speck in your brother's eye or your friend's eye when you have a log in your own eye? Just imagine that. Walking along with this log in your own eye, trying to be a speck inspector in the life of someone else. The point is, you got more things in your life that are wrong than the simple thing you're criticizing in someone else's life. See how this hits hard? See, I'm convinced people must be charmed into righteousness. Really. I think you're won to Christ. You're not embarrassed to believe in Christ. You're not criticized into the faith. You're charmed into the faith. And the way we charm others is by accepting them for who they are. This is brand new information for many of you. I realize that. And I don't mean that to be insulting. So let me get specific. We need to accept people who worship differently than we do, rather than judge them. We need to accept those who look and dress differently than we do. We need to accept those who are young and immature and making mistakes. It's part of being young and immature. You make mistakes. We don't write them off. We need to be accepting of those who struggle with addictions. May not be your problem, your struggle, but you have your own addictions. We're all strugglers. Just that our list of struggles is a little different than the one we're criticizing. And we pick someone to criticize who happens to have an addiction that isn't ours. Criticizing will never help anyone get over an addiction. We accept them for who they are, and we make a way to help them find their way through it and get victory over it.
And so once again, he's acknowledging our failure to do this. He's talking about how we fail to do this. We judge people in a way we shouldn't judge. We worry when we shouldn't worry. He's acknowledging these are all the things that we do wrong. But so if this is a chapter to combat hypocrisy and we are not going to fulfill this correctly, then are you not just basically placed everyone under the burden that everyone's a hypocrite and you're going to remain a hypocrite unless you follow the Sermon on the Mount perfectly? How is that a solution to hypocrisy? Hey, the only way to not be a hypocrite is to fulfill the Sermon on the Mount perfectly, but none of us are fulfilling it perfectly, so therefore we're all hypocrites. So then what do? We have to take our hypocrisy to the foot of the cross. We have to rely on imputed righteousness. And we got to make sure we convey to the world that my standing before God is not because I'm better or perfect or righteous. It's because of an imputed righteousness. And then I'm a sinner just like you. Oh, I don't commit maybe the same sins you do or think the same way you do. There's some things that have changed, but in my heart, I'm still a sinner and there's still plenty of sin that doesn't match the scriptures. We don't convey that very well. And I know it's hard to always convey that because sometimes we got to take a stand for righteousness, but we have to just convey the fact that while we're standing against righteousness, we have to acknowledge what's in our own heart and our own sin. We have to acknowledge our own struggles. You know, it's like you can have a Christian. I'll use this. You know, we could talk about Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion. I can't even tell you what the song, I can't even tell you what the letters stand for. Okay. I can't even tell you that. Okay. But let's just say that anytime that song comes up, conservatives go crazy. It's so immoral, ungodly. It's disgusting. It's vile. It's horrible. Did you see their performance at the Grammys? And everybody loses and condemns. Because we're taking a stand for righteousness. And so all the world sees is, man, Christians have a standard of righteousness. And then guess what they found out? They find out that, oh, look at how many Christians look at porn, and look at how many Christians this, and look at how much adultery takes place. Look how much, well, a bunch of hypocrites. Now, I'm not saying we don't take a stand, but guess what? Well, you're condemning Cardi B and the song. How about acknowledging your own struggles with lust, your own struggles with pornography, or your own struggles? I've told the story before of a gentleman who walked into a convenience store / gas station that he went to every morning. And it was, I don't know what year it was, but he walks into the store. He looks over and realizes they've just added a whole section of pornographic magazines for sale, covered obviously in those old brown little wrappers where you couldn't see the cover, but you could see the title of the magazine. And he walked in, and he'd been going to the store for years, so everybody knew him. And so he walked up to the counter, and someone's like, "Hey, how's it going?" He's like, "Oh, pretty good. I just want you to know I won't be coming back." "How come?" Because of the pornographic magazines." "Oh, because you're offended by them?" "No, because I want to buy them. I want to look at them." Now, you could argue, should he have told anyone? Should he have said anything? We could talk about that. But the point of the story is that he was being honest. And so, look, you can condemn some music video that you think is immoral, but you may sometimes as men condemning it, you may want to also be acknowledging the fact that you are very filled with lust by looking at it, that you desired it. Like sometimes, so I just think sometimes we create this mentality of, look how righteous we are. He's acknowledging that we all fail all of these things. He just went through Matthew 5, 6, and 7, broken down each chapter. Very good job at doing that, giving each chapter a title. Very good job at doing that. All very helpful, but he's not giving you, how do I process this? Other than saying, this gets rid of hypocrisy. I hold up the Sermon on the Mount. Look, everyone, this will get rid of hypocrisy. And while I preach it, I acknowledge that everyone sitting there is not fulfilling it. So that means everyone there is a hypocrite. So what do I do with it? Oh, man, okay, I went to church today and I've got to work harder on the Sermon on the Mount. I got to do better because, man, I'm a hypocrite. I got to do better. I got to do better. I got to do better. And 20 years after being a Christian, you're going to still sit there going, man, I got to work harder on the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I'm not saying because you're going to fail excuses it. I'm saying that we have to have a different way of processing this. How do we process this in a more biblical-minded way? That when we speak to the world about unrighteousness, that we acknowledge our own desire and our own unrighteousness. And that we may want to realize that the Sermon on the Mount may not make the intended purpose may not be how to cure hypocrisy. Maybe the intended purpose on the Sermon on the Mount was to reveal the hypocrisy of everyone and to demonstrate a moral standard that condemns everyone and drive us right to the foot of the cross where we have an imputed righteousness from the very person who kept the Sermon on the Mount. And in him, I am obedient to the Sermon on the Mount in my position. And then in my practice, I strive to live out what is true positionally, practically, even though I'm never going to do it perfectly. And that is what we need to convey and understand. And if we don't preach it that way, it just becomes a list of rules that no one's ever going to follow. So we either convince ourselves that we are doing it, or we just figure out which one of the Sermon on the Mount, which ones are the bad ones. Oh, adultery. That's the bad one. That's the one that must be condemned. The worry section, that's okay. You can worry. You can have a pastor completely overwhelmed with worry and anxiety. He's got ulcers. He's have all kinds of stress-related issues to his health. He's not going to get excommunicated or brought up and fired from the ministry. No, even though but if he commits adultery, that'll be the end, and that'll be the end of anyone in the church. So adultery, that's the big one. The worry part, not even to be worried about. See how that's what we do. We just find the big things and say, that's the thing you have to stay with. All the rest of that's okay. No, this is the righteous standards of the king for the kingdom. If you violate it, you violate it. It's a big deal. But we create our list of mortal and venial sins. And then we convince ourselves of how obedient we are to the Sermon on the Mount, or run around telling everyone else that they're unrighteous. Well, in the reality, we're just as unrighteous, but in different ways. Very frustrating. Okay, we got 3 minutes for them to wrap this up. We'll listen to them wrap it up.
Bold counsel for those who love someone struggling with an addiction. It's just one of the takeaway lessons that arise from Matthew and Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You're listening to Insight for Living. Chuck Swindoll has titled his message, The Sermon of All Sermons. And to learn more about this ministry, visit us online at insightworld.org. Now, by way of clarification, our brand new comprehensive study in Matthew will capture our imagination over the next several months, in fact, the better part of the year. Chuck started with the birth of our King, and now we're tracing his footsteps through all 28 chapters, moving toward his great commission to go and make disciples. And in conjunction with this broadcast series, Chuck has recently completed a commentary on Matthew as well. And because of the enormity of this study, Chuck's commentary comes in 2 hardbound volumes. The set is called Swindoll's Living Insights Commentary on Matthew. Whether you're new to the Bible or you're teaching the Bible as a pastor, you'll find Chuck's approach to Matthew both scholarly and accessible. And it's written in the engaging style that's become a hallmark of Chuck's teaching. So to purchase Swindoll's Living Insights Commentary on Matthew, go to insight.org/offer. Or if you prefer, call us If you're listening in the U.S., dial 1-800-772-8888. Insight for Living Ministries is supported not by the purchase of books and resources, but through the contributions of people like you. And we invite you to join our mission to introduce King Jesus to all 195 countries of the world. To give a donation today, call us. If you're listening in the...
And then they end with the... I know I say it every episode, but every time I hear it on Christian radio, I just have to roll my eyes. Hey, this ministry is possible not because of the books you buy. Hey, we just wanted you to buy some books, but just make sure you understand that you buy those books. That's not going to support this ministry. The purchase of that book, that money doesn't support this ministry. Buying those books, that money goes somewhere else. So what we need you to do, buy the books because somebody somewhere is getting that money, and then give us some money because we can't do this broadcast without you, because you know how much it costs for someone to stand behind a pulpit and preach a sermon, and we record that message digitally, and then we take it and edit it into 3 parts and then broadcast it. Oh, the cost is overwhelmingly crazy. You wouldn't imagine how much it costs for me to stand behind the pulpit and preach a sermon and record that sermon on my laptop. I'm telling you, every week that we do it, I sit there and just look at everyone like, guys, I don't know how much longer I can record these sermons because it's costing us a bundle. We're going to have to start asking people for money because it's costing us thousands and thousands of dollars to record my sermons, chop them. Well, my sermons are not chopped up, but if we did so, no, our sermons, look, we were a small, I say it every week because I just want you to realize that just how the disingenuousness that there is in that. It's just not truthfully articulating the reality. Here, he preaches sermons at a church. In many cases, these are older sermons. He preaches a sermon. The sermon is taken. It's recorded digitally. It's given to someone. They edit it up, and then it's sent to radio stations to be broadcast. In many cases, those radio stations don't charge them a dime for being on the air. They don't charge them. Well, if they're not being charged, then what's the cost? The cost is hiring that person to do that, the voiceover for the introduction and the conclusion. That's it. And whoever edited it. And you could find a 14-year-old using their laptop who could edit their sermons and chop them up in different ways. You could find a 14-year-old who could do that. 13-year-old who could do that. Right? So it doesn't require some high team. And then you get paid. And we've watched this. I get so tired. Well, I'm going to bring this up here again, because this whole thing is about supposedly hypocrisy. You'll have these pastors who preach their sermons, and I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was listening to Christian Satellite Network on my way home, and they were introducing a new pastor whose sermons are going to be aired on Christian Satellite Network. Basically, it's Calvary Chapel's radio network, and they were like, "Welcome, welcome." Next week your program starts airing. So what do you have in store for us? And he's like, well, I think we're in Romans. I don't know. I don't know. So in other words, he doesn't even know. So there's a team of people who takes his sermons, and they're the ones that are going to be putting on radio. He doesn't even have a clue. He doesn't even know what's going on. He doesn't even know. He just knows his program's going to be on that radio now. He's not even intimately involved on the whole project. But yet, if you start digging into these ministries' tax things, guess what? You can have, say, someone like MacArthur. He gets paid from Grace Community Church, but he also gets paid for Grace to You, their radio and internet ministry. But what is his radio and internet ministry? Just the sermons that he preached at Grace to You gets chopped up and aired on radio, and then you get paid for that? What are you getting paid for? You're not doing any extra work. Now, sometimes he'll come in and do like a little intro or a Q&A, but how much does it take to produce you sit down, someone turns on a microphone, and you say, "Hey, so Dr. MacArthur, this week you've been studying Romans chapter 7. So we've got some questions in regards to Romans chapter 7. He answers those questions, boom, he leaves. Someone else does the rest of the work, and then they get him ready. And then he gets paid for that? Like, I'm just baffled by the way the Christian world, but none of that is considered hypocrisy. Hey, this radio program, it's not supported by the merchandise you buy. We need extra money. Wait, so you're telling me Chuck Swindoll's church can't support the ministry? I know I say this all the time, but I don't get the racket that's been created here. Now, it's one thing to say, hey guys, if you want to give, here's the address, here's the website, give. However, this ministry is supported by the church. Stonebrook Church, I think, is the church. Swindoll pastors now. It's supported by there. But if you would like to contribute because you feel that we are offering spiritual resources that are greatly helping you in your spiritual life, then by all means, feel free to do that. That's one thing. But don't act like, hey, the only way this is going to happen is through your giving. No, it should be supported by the church. So who's getting the money for the product? And then who gets, so all the money goes directly to you don't even know where your money is going to. Is it going just to support that, or is it going to give a salary? Does Chuck Swindoll get a salary from the church and from the radio ministry? A lot of pastors do that. They get paid from their church, and then the radio ministry is just their sermons. So then the money that comes into the church, that's paying the pastor's salary. Then the money that comes into the radio ministry, what cost is it covering? I don't know. What's the cost you're covering? I was on Christian radio. I literally had to pay to be on Christian radio. All right. We didn't ask for any money when we were on Christian radio. The church paid for that. So I'm as someone who's been in the world, I just don't get, as someone who does what I'm doing right here, 3 hours of live broadcasting today. We're over 3 hours of live broadcasting. Yes, Swindoll's better than I am. I understand that. MacArthur's better than I am. I understand that. All the other preachers out there, I got no illusions of grandeur. I know my limitations and that other people are far better than I am. But you know how much it's costing me? It cost me $100 for our internet ministry, $100, about $120 a month. For our podcasting hosting site and for the ability to go live, $15 a piece for our 2 web pod pages. So I always try to figure it out. It's like $140, $150 a month for us, our internet ministry. Okay, about $150, I think. I could break it down by the penny, but about $150. That's it. Now that's a lot for a little small church. Yes, no question about it. But guess what? That you're telling me that these big churches can't afford that? I just, and especially on a sermon about hypocrisy, it just seems so disingenuous that wait a minute, I don't know how it works. And like when I started digging into some of the MacArthur salaries, you start realizing that he's getting paid from the church and he's getting paid for grace to you, and all it is his sermons. Why is he getting an additional salary? It would be like my church paying me not only as a pastor, but then paying me for doing what I'm doing right now. But isn't what I'm doing right now a part of being a pastor? Isn't MacArthur's internet ministry or Swindoll's internet ministry, radio ministry, isn't that a part of being a pastor? Isn't that a part of the ministry of that church? But it's so just common now that for me to call it out, I'm the bad guy. Like people will get mad at me. And people will get furious at me, and I never say, why do you get mad at me? You can give money to whomever you want. I'm not saying people send us money. I don't send it back, okay? I'm always grateful. I try to immediately make sure, okay, that's going to cover, okay, that covers 3 months of that. I mean, one of our listeners in Ohio basically her giving has basically paid for the internet ministry. Almost by itself. Other people have given additional that paid for this microphone that I'm talking into, has paid for a lot of additional things, helped pay for the pod pages. One of the listeners, I think in Tennessee, basically took care of the pod pages for almost a year. You know how helpful that is to a little church? That's super helpful. So the church we can pay for the building, or for the electricity and for upkeep of the building and those kinds of things. So it's just you've got to just whenever I hear that, I'm always just baffled. Hey, we just want you to buy these books, but we want you to realize that none of that money goes to this ministry. Now we need you to give. We need you to give, and it's only possible if you give. It's only possible if you give. Who are you fooling? If my church went away, I think I could probably cut some things out. And I think, I know this much. Even if the church went away, I think I could possibly find a way. I would try to find some way that I could still minister doing my podcast some way. I would find a way to do so. And hopefully I could do so without asking people for money. If people wanted to give, great. If people want to give, great. We have a donate. I'm not gonna lie. We have a donation tab on our pod page, or only on one pod page. I think only the Theology Central pod page. I don't mention it. It's there because we had the ability to do so. It's there. But I can't. It would be unfair for me to say that we can't be on the air any longer if you don't support us. There's always a way to get your message on the internet. Again, one of our listeners sent me their podcast. I told them because it's a teaching podcast, that they should possibly try to get connected with iTunes University to expand it. But they use Anchor. Sounds good. They use Anchor, which is free. They seem to be good at what they're doing. They seem to be very good at what they're doing, and they've got a plan. You can get your podcast out there. So or you're teaching. If you're just taking your sermons, here's what you do. You take your sermons, you take them, you upload them to Anchor using the Anchor podcast platform, and then they're out there for free. And then if you need now websites cost money, but they're not that much. I don't know how much our website costs. Our pod page is $15 a month. I don't know what actually pod pages are about $20 a month because you have to pay for a domain. So that's actually $40 a month for our pod pages. And then we have a website which we had to pay a domain for. I don't even know how. It's not that much. So I'm just saying you can get the teaching and get all of the information out there. It's just, I don't know. It's just interesting hearing a sermon supposedly against hypocrisy. And I just feel that there's a level of not being honest with the way the finances work for internet ministry or radio ministry. So I'll stop right there. Yeah. Okay. I feel bad for doing that, but just so frustrating. Hey, we got to get rid of hypocrisy. And it's just like, well, are we really being completely transparent and honest with there when you say, hey, buy these books, but that's not going to support us. Now we need additional money. We need additional money because the church that Swindoll pastors, that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient. They can't support it. Yeah, because Swindoll's in a little broken down building in the middle of nowhere with 6 people bringing in whatever we bring in a month. I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure Swindoll's church brings in some serious cash. So it's so frustrating. All right. And just know that if you go to Swindoll's site to download some of the sermons, they do have a link to the archives that you don't have to pay, but they're still selling sermons for like $1.99 or something a pop. In 2021, people are still going there and paying to get a sermon. Yeah. So, okay. But hey. Just follow the Sermon on the Mount. You won't be a hypocrite. And I bet you the Sermon on the Mount has nothing to say about money, does it? Does it have anything to say about money or greed? I don't. You tell me. All right. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. Yes, continuing my never-ending frustration with American Christianity. I'm sorry. I'll always be baffled how Christianity was able to transform itself into a money-making industry, a business where there's ways to gain so much money. And I'll just always be baffled by it, that more Christians don't go, well, wait a minute. Is there a better way to do this? Now, I know churches need money, obviously. I wouldn't be in this building with electricity without it. So obviously churches need money, but there's got to be a way to just manage things. I don't know. I'll just stop. All right. Everyone have a great day. God bless.